Well, annotations solve a fundamental human need of people to relate to other people and share information to each other. And so it's actually fundamental. It's been something people have wanted for a long time, but it's been difficult technically, but now its time seems to have come. It addresses so many needs of people, of what they want to do, whether they want to comment on things or express their opinion or edit or change things that they're working with, whether it's text or documents, and possibly in the future video.
Obviously, when you're developing documents, when you're working with documents, it's now useful to have, it's always been useful to have two levels, to have the basic document and to have a level of annotations on it. There are lots of systems which allow you to do that. They're not open. They don't. We can't share interoperable annotations at the moment between them. But my feeling is that it's such a anybody who works together with documents at the moment typically they need the opportunity to be able to highlight something and start a discussion about it. I've got great hopes that if we can get an annotation standard, then we'll be able to share annotation between different types of software, and the use of annotations in reviewing things, in education, for example, allowing a class to all discuss things, to discuss a given document which is out there and where they don't have right access. I think hopefully it'll become much easier.
I think it's an exciting way to contextualize communication and lets you build deeper conversations by referring to what's gone before. And we know since the beginning of scholarship that you get further by referring to what's already been done than by trying to recreate from the beginning. And if we can, links gave us one step in doing that. Annotation is, I think, a next step of you're referring not just to an entire text or a pointer within the text, but contextualizing notes within or alongside a text. We can give that context to the next reader coming along and just dig into the point of difference or discussion. It could be good for political debate and good for creative discussion.
I started to realize the real potential of this is not simply the idea of, oh, here's an application that can do this. It's we can add this new layer to the web, and I understood the vision you guys had, and I understood how the idea that this could be distributed among a lot of different services, a lot of different users, and really empowering users to be fully engaged with the web. And once I realized what the real potential of annotations is, it's more than just somebody being able to mark up a page and to share that with somebody else. At an underlying level, it's a fundamental shift in how the users of the web can engage with content and engage with other users and discover things, and to make critical analysis on the web and to make real dialogue possible. And that's what interests me.
I think I can only speculate, but the idea of annotation as a way of interacting with digital documents has been around since the dawn of the web. Of course, annotation has been around for many, many hundreds of years longer than that, but since at least the 1960s, and in some cases much earlier, people talking about the power of digital documents have recognized that one of the aspects of these digital documents that can be incredibly powerful is the ability to make references from sections of those documents to other documents in order to build, if you like, a browsable web of information. Now, of course, that sounds an awful lot like the web as we know it today. It sounds like hyperlinks, but as brilliant as the invention of the hyperlink was, they have some limitations, which is that hyperlinks need to be put there by the authors of documents and not by other people. For my part, I think a lot of the interest in annotation may be coming from a realization that the web, the real structure of the web as it is today, has turned out to be quite different from what was envisioned in the 70s and 80s. In particular, many people who use the web perhaps restrict their browsing to half a dozen large websites. I'm thinking of the Wikipedias and Facebooks of the World Wide Web, these huge monoliths that essentially accrete information, and they provide a really useful service. Wikipedia in particular is an extraordinary example of the accumulation and sorting of human knowledge in one place, and the problem that it solves is how do we navigate an inordinate quantity of information on the web, and an amount of information that is increasing far more every day than any human could read or ingest in a lifetime. I think perhaps the interesting thing about annotation is that it provides an answer to the same problem. How do we understand these vast quantities of information? How do we begin to find the connections and linkages between different ideas? But it perhaps answers them in a way that is decentralized. It allows individuals to annotate documents that they didn't author, rather than requiring that the organizational structure centralizes, as in an entity like Wikipedia.
So early on, we didn't have the notions that we do now of things like REST and the models for interaction. The web was a very static place early on, and people had a client-server, very strict notion of how things had to work. We didn't have the technology that would allow us to scale, either horizontally or vertically. So early on, while it was a great idea, clearly, and I think Mark Andreessen did the right thing by taking it out of the early version of Netscape, because it would have probably, hindsight not necessarily being 2020 in this case, it could have been a dismal failure and put everyone off for the future. Whereas today we have all of the technology capacity to make it a real success. What we're missing is the standards so that we can all implement the same thing rather than every company reinventing new wheels that all happen to be round and do the same thing.
So I see now things like Medium and New York Times and other great initiatives, Rap Genius, which has become Genius.com. I see people moving towards annotation. And so I say, okay, there's an underlying groundswell of multi-vendor stakeholder here. And so I think that's a contributing factor as to why it could succeed now as opposed to why it hasn't succeeded in the past. I also just think that the technology wasn't there before. One of the things that's missing from the web is this idea of a robust anchor, being able to link to not just a web page, but to an arbitrary string that the author didn't already designate. So right now I could link to a heading that has an ID or a paragraph that has an ID, but I couldn't link to one particular sentence within that and have that work across different browsers and across different sites. And I think that in the past they didn't break down the problem of annotations to its component parts well enough. So now we have the idea we're going to do this robust anchoring thing. We have the idea of having the interchange format so that annotations can go from one system to another. We have the idea of reusing existing things like activity streams or other protocols that will let us post to different services. I think that by starting from the building blocks and going from there, I think it has a better chance of succeeding.
So the biggest challenge in annotation at the moment is the robust anchoring problem, where if you go and annotate an article on the homepage of CNN, for example, and you highlight some text and make a great comment about it, if you came back 10 minutes later and that article is moved in the page, it could be that your annotation no longer anchors correctly with that article. And the next day, Maybe your article is still in the CNN site somewhere, but it's probably not on the homepage. So how can we find where that content has moved to then successfully reattach your annotation so that the value add that you've given to the community can be maintained?
Well, one of the coding challenges encountered was how to set the anchors for annotation, and there wasn't at the time I was looking at it a good way to identify the spot in the text that you wanted to annotate except by gigantic pattern matching expressions. So better tooling to identify positioning of notes is probably important, but I think we're seeing that that's important now to a whole lot of other efforts that might be converging. So digital publishing wants sort of page numbering that persists across various formats in which you might read, and that too is a principle that has been important in legal scholarship. You need consistent references to the page number of court cases, even if you're getting them from electronic or print media.
Yeah, the possibilities are almost endless. One obvious thing would be accessibility. Would become a crowdsourced concern rather than something that the individual website owners had to take care of directly. So, for example, if you had an image and you didn't provide an alt tag with an annotation, someone else could give a full description of what that image is in a way that would make sense to a blind user of the web, whereas you might give it an alt tag, but it could be meaningless to someone who was disabled in that way. Equally, cross-system and platforms can be built such that instead of having to put your same status on Facebook and on Twitter and on LinkedIn and in Allo, I think is the most recent entry in this space. Instead, you could simply publish an annotation about a resource, and then that could be syndicated trivially around any number of social platforms using potentially activity streams. And we've been discussing with the social web working group how that might occur. And then after you have syndication, of course, you can then get it out again. So instead of being locked in by the vendors to one particular platform, if you don't like the terms of Facebook and you do like the terms of Allo, for example, it would be trivial to migrate all of your content from Facebook over to Allo without losing anything, because it would all follow the standards rather than being proprietary formats.
I would like to believe that in the distant future, the web will be a vast, varied and colourful assembly of sources of information with no organisation or individual or company controlling access to what is known and what is not. Annotation provides us with a way of navigating that information that is analogous to the way we navigate information in the real world and in libraries, which is that we browse. We may talk to friends about ideas that are in our heads, and they may provide us with references to things that we should read or understand or people we should talk to. And annotation provides a way of providing that kind of interaction on top of the information on the web without requiring that the publishers of the information provide it themselves. So the future that I would like to see, perhaps not the most likely outcome, but the future that I would like to see for annotation on the web is one in which annotation becomes a layer of information that sits on top of what is published on the web, that is provided by people you trust or people that you know or people who hold views perhaps opposed to yours, who you want to be challenged by. As distinct from a future in which the only way to make sense of the vast array of information on the web is by going to web properties, maybe not controlled by individuals, but web properties that are nonetheless themselves accumulations of power and information. I would much rather that the information were distributed so that in the event that any one entity can no longer survive, in the event that the Wikimedia Foundation can no longer raise money, we don't end up with a crisis in which we lose a vast amount of knowledge.